Good morning. My name is Delegate Maggie McIntosh, and I would like to welcome everyone to our first meeting in 2021 of the work group on the assessment and funding of school facilities. This work group was created by the 21st Century School Facilities Act based on recommendations by the Knott Commission to examine the data results of the initial facilities assessment and to make recommendations on the use of facility assessment in funding decisions. Because of the delay in the facilities assessment, the Built to Learn Act extended the timeline for the use of this work group's recommendation and funding decisions. Last interim, the work group did not meet because of COVID-19 and to wait for the completed facilities assessment before making some final decisions. Although many things have changed since the 21st Century School Facilities Act passed in 2018, the needs of facilities in our state have remained present. It is even more clear now how important educationally sufficient schools are for the growth and development of our students. While the Built to Learn Act will provide record funding for all 24 jurisdictions to soon begin to address the critical needs for renovating schools, the use of facilities assessment is an additional piece to the puzzle to address the dire needs to finally provide students with school buildings they deserve. I'd like to just pause for a minute here and just reflect from my vantage point of over the last 2 decades being involved with, in some way or form, the school facilities issues. This is very much like the moment that we had after we passed the Built to Learn, the Bridge to Excellence almost 20 years ago, and followed it by the COP Commission that looked at facilities. It's the same kind of sequence. We just passed Kerwin and our blueprint for Maryland students. And now we need to look at facilities, I think, very much in the same light to make sure they're sufficient and provide our students adequate tools and learning settings to excel. So I say this because the COP Commission, as it was known, had Nancy Kopp, who is currently now our state treasurer. She was then a delegate on the Appropriations Committee. I mention this because she is not with us today. She's at a Board of Public Works meeting, but in introducing, still here, 2 decades later in a different role, and will be a great resource for us. Delegate Mark Corman is returning to the group work, and also County Executive Jan Gardner, who's representing MACO, and Perry Willis, the Executive Director of Support Services at Cecil County Public Schools, representing PZAM. Senator Peters is also returning to the work group, but unable to attend the meeting today. We have new members who I'm very happy to welcome. First, Senator McCray was appointed to replace President Ferguson. Molly Jose, member at large of Baltimore County Board of Education, representing MABE, and a very special new member to this committee. I'm going to stop and say a few words about him. Is the former Senator Ed Casemeyer, who's the newly appointed chair of the IAC. I want to stop just a minute and acknowledge Ed's presence here today. Senator Casemeyer was the chair of Budget and Tax Committee in the Senate side, and has a long history of involvement with school facilities, their issues, and a big supporter of our schools in the state of Maryland. Since his retirement, he has stepped up in many ways And I think this is probably the most important way. He will step forward to continue his service to the citizens of Maryland. I just want to tell you both personally and professionally how happy I am, Senator, that you have accepted this chairmanship. And we welcome you.
Thank you very much. It's very nice of you. Hope I can meet the task. Appreciate
You will.
thoughts.
All right. We know you will.
Okay.
If any members or members of the public have questions and need anything related to the work group, Michelle Lambert, who is on this call from DLS, will be staffing the work group and can provide any necessary assistance. Rachel Heiss and Michael Rubenstein from DLS will also be staffing the work group. The plan for this meeting is for the IAC to do a quick summary of the Built to Learn Act, and DLS will do a summary of Chapter 698 from last session, which added additional items for this work group's charge. Then the IAC and the schools facility assessment vendor will give an overview of the progress and the progress of the school's facility assessment. We will end with a discussion of the draft schedule of future work group meetings. Before I begin, I would like to state that I think our goal should be, and I will just say this as chair, our goal should be to address as many of the issues that we have confronting us by the end of the year before we go into session. So if any of our recommendations require legislation, that can be prepared or drafted for the next session. There may be outstanding issues that we cannot resolve fully because of the timing of the assessment, but I think we should again make our goal to be that these issues be resolved during the next session so that we leave this term of office having put behind us or in front of us great roadmap for school facilities in the state of Maryland. So with that, are there any questions before we begin? Seeing none, I'm now going to ask the IAC to begin with the summary of the Built to Learn Act. Go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am going to get my screen up so that you can see the slides.
Good.
Okay. So good morning, Madam Chair, members of the work group. The Built to Learn Act allows the Maryland Stadium Authority to issue up to $2.2 billion in special revenue bonds to support school construction. We have been working closely with the Maryland Stadium Authority to implement the Built to Learn Act, and they currently estimate that the available funding will support around $1.8 billion in bonds through the life of the program. So just as a starting point to give the LEAs an estimate of where they'll be, we're using that $1.8 billion number. There are 6 counties that receive a specific percentage of total funding, as you can see in the table on this slide. The other 17 counties share the remaining 11.5%. Prince George's will get their share through a public-private partnership program, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Before a bond sale can occur, the IAC and the Maryland Stadium Authority must enter into a program MOU, and then the Maryland Stadium Authority and the LEAs will subsequently enter into specific MOUs to govern each project. Built to Learn funding can be used in combination with other state funding programs, and the projects follow the same regulations that govern the IAC's capital improvement program. MSA manages the projects by default, but can allow an LEA to execute the projects themselves. Unlike the IAC CIP process, approvals for projects through the Built to Learn will occur on a rolling basis. The bill specified that the first projects approved should be those projects that were considered eligible but deferred due to fiscal constraints in the capital improvement program. Projects that begin after June 1, 2020 are eligible for reimbursement, but only if they aren't completed at the time of approval. Finally, projects in counties with a 50% state cost share and that are forward funded, meaning that the LEA has expended their entire share and some of the state share, are eligible to get up to 150% of the IEC's gross area baselines, which determine the amount of square footage eligible for state participation. As far as reporting for the Built to Learn program, MSA will report to the Governor and the General Assembly on the status of the program annually. And subsequently, they will conduct a 10-year evaluation on the effectiveness of the program in 2030. And the IAC will also submit a report on that evaluation. In addition to new program funding, the Built to Learn Act also modified the IAC's eligible costs for all of its programs, making design, consulting, and planning costs eligible through our capital improvement program and any of our other funding sources, and also requiring the IAC to define what furniture, fixtures, and equipment are eligible. The Built to Learn Act requires that the IAC's regulations include these actual state and local cost share percentages produced by the IAC's formula, but those calculations are also held harmless for fiscal years 23 and 24. So in those fiscal years, no LEA will receive a lower percentage than they did in fiscal year 22. There is a special provision for counties that meet some criteria. If they have a median household income in the bottom quartile and are calculated to have a 50% state share, then instead they will receive the same cost share as the adjacent county closest to 50%. At this time, the provision only applies to Garrett County, and their cost share will be increased to be the same as Allegheny County at 90%. The Built to Learn Act also modified the enrollment growth and relocatable classroom program. The threshold for eligibility under that program previously was 300. It's been reduced to 250 relocatables in the county. And it also slightly changed how funding is distributed. The first 40 million is allocated proportionally based on enrollment, just like it always has been. But any additional funding that's allocated will be based on a proportional share of enrollment growth above the statewide average. And after FY 2026, the mandatory allocation for that program does increase from 40 million to 80 million. Prince George's County, instead of receiving money through the Built to Learn percentages that we discussed earlier, is instead getting $25 million per year beginning in FY 26 to support their public-private partnership program, as long as they've entered into that P3 agreement by 2024. The IAC in Prince George's will report annually on the program, and in 2029, the IAC will submit a 5-year evaluation of the agreement. As you all are aware, the Built to Learn Act also reconstitutes and extends the work group on the assessment and funding of school facilities. I think that Rachel is going to describe your charges a little bit later in detail, so I'll be very brief. The work group must decide if and how the relative condition of schools as determined by the assessment, which we'll also be talking about later, should be used in funding decisions. As you mentioned, Madam Chair, your report is due at the end of the year. And one other side note is just that the assessment cannot be used in funding decisions until at least fiscal year 23. So the Healthy School Facility Fund was extended by the Built to Learn Act. Originally, it was only in 2 fiscal years, FY 20 and 21. It was extended through fiscal year 2022, and it required 30 million, which was actually exceeded in the 22 budget. There's also 40 million required in fiscal years 23 and 24. And beginning with the FY 21 appropriation, 50% of the available funding must go to Baltimore City. The program was also expanded to include pipe installation, roofs, and severe issues that require schools to be closed. The Built to Learn Act also creates the Public School Facilities Priority Fund, which uses the results of the statewide facilities assessment to allocate funding to address facility needs of the highest priority schools. The program starts with 40 million allocated in FY25 and 26, and that increases to 80 million beginning in FY27. So currently the IAC administers a number of programs that you can see in this slide, the Capital Improvement Program, EGRC, the Healthy School Facility Fund, but the Built to Learn Act envisioned a new structure for the IAC's funding programs to more holistically meet the highest needs of school facilities. So the Built to Learn program and the Priority Fund after enactment of Built to Learn as we move forward with this program are going to be used to meet the highest priority needs. EGRC funding is going to meet capacity needs. And then, of course, the Capital Improvement Program will continue and is going to be used to meet LEA priorities, including capital maintenance systemic type projects. Beginning in FY 2027, the Aging Schools Program and the School Safety Grant Program are consolidated into that priority fund. These funding sources will work together and will allow the LEAs and the state to look at the entire portfolio of school facilities and complete the really important and critical upfront planning that we have to effectively support Maryland schools. Instead of having available funding sources drive the types of projects that are being executed, the project needs will drive the funding requests. The Built to Learn Act also requires the IAC to evaluate the life cycle costs of public school facilities and to submit a report to the General Assembly by October of 2023 with annual updates on how that initiative is going until that point. And finally, the Built to Learn Act requires the State Department of Education, the Maryland Stadium Authority, and the IAC to collaborate with LEAs to develop a CTE program or an apprenticeship pathway that will result in a school building maintenance certification. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for questions.
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
You know, that's the tagline for this last year. Madam Chair, you're on mute. Are there any questions? Any questions, please? Yes, Jan.
I have one question about the Built to Learn Act. Has the MSA and the IAC entered into the program MOU, or is that yet to come?
The draft MOU will go to the IAC at our meeting tomorrow beginning at 9 a.m.
Okay.
And it is included in the IAC agenda that's available on our website right now.
Okay, thank you.
Senator McCray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for the IEC. In what year do you see the Build to Learn Act in its peak year?
We are just now trying to get that pipeline understood. We started meeting as soon as the bill passed with the LEAs and even before to holistically understand all of the LEAs and where their projects are and lining out the annual cash flow requirements throughout the year. Again, this is not once a year that these projects are allocated so that we can know the answer to that. Right now, it looks like we're off to a less than speedy start. We are working with MSA. We've got up to 250 million. It looks like that we could have available, 150 million in the first sale, 100 in the second. But we are finding that it is difficult to get all of these projects ready to go to start spending money. So it looks right now, we'll know more in the next 6 months, but it looks like right now it'll probably be in year 2 and going into 3 will be the peak years.
Okay, very good. Very good. Any other questions? Okay, the next presentation is summary of Is this
I'm
the
gonna do-
summary for, this is for you, Michelle, right?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm going to give a summary of Senate Bill 551, which is
Right.
Chapter 698 from last session. So on page 18 of your materials for today's meeting, it lays out the current charge of the work group. Chapter 698 from last session made revisions to the 21st Century School Facilities Act and the Built to Learn Act, including changes to the statutory charge of this work group. The tasks of the work group related to the school facilities assessment remain unchanged from 2018. The charge of the work group related to the assessment is to, 1, consider how the relative condition of public school facilities within the educational facilities sufficiency standards and the facility condition index should be prioritized, taking into account local priorities in consultation with local jurisdictions. 2, determine whether the prioritization should be by category and by local jurisdiction or statewide. And 3, to determine whether the results should be incorporated into school construction funding decisions. The work group began discussions on these issues in the hypothetical in 2019, but because the assessment was not completed, the recommendations by the members in 2019 were considered draft and preliminary. The work group has 4 additional new charges this year based on the changes made during the legislative session in response to concerns raised. First, the work group is to consider the factors used in the state and local cost share formula for each county to incorporate changes to the state's primary and secondary education funding formulas adopted in the blueprint. In tandem with this provision, Chapter 698 included a hold harmless for FY23 and FY24 that prevents the state share of public school construction projects from decreasing from FY22 levels. Exhibit 1 on page 19 of your packet shows the effect this hold harmless has on each county. 5 counties benefit from this hold harmless: Baltimore City, Carroll County, Cecil County, Harford County, and Queen Anne's County. In March 2021, the IEC had proposed new state cost share percentages for FY23 and FY24 based on the most recent recalculation of the cost share formula. The formula for calculating the cost share percentages was last modified in 2004 and takes multiple factors into account. The legislature intended the hold harmless that the work group can align the school construction formulas based on the changes in the blueprint, similar to the review that was done previously when funding formulas have changed. Second, the work group is now charged with making recommendations related to the methods used to establish the gross area baselines and the maximum state construction allocation for each public school construction project approved for state funding. The IAC updated the space allocations in 2019 and renamed them gross area baselines. The IAC establishes a range of appropriate per student square foot allocations for elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as for special education students, career and technology students, and specialized programs. In general, multiplying the cost per square foot by the applicable gross area baselines for each proposed project yields the maximum allowable cost that the state is subject to the state local cost share formula. Third, the work group is charged with looking into the purpose and implementation of the local share of school construction costs revolving loan fund. The 21st Century School Facilities Act established the fund to provide loans to local governments to forward fund the local share of school construction projects. It may be used to provide low or no interest loans to local governments. And the last new charge of the work group is to look into long-term effects on school construction decisions for school facilities and funding or other incentives for local jurisdictions within the school construction process that reduce the cost per student and the total ownership of public school facilities. The work group discussed potential incentives to encourage LEAs to reduce the total cost of ownership of their school facilities in 2019. The change in the work group's charge this interim is just an extension of that conversation. So that is the current charge of the work group based on the changes from the last legislative session. Except for the facilities assessment, the plan for the work group is to spend at least one meeting doing a deep dive on each of these issues, providing additional background and context to help the work group make decisions on these items. Because the data for the facilities assessment is so dense and there are a variety of decisions to be made, the work group will be given an update or have decision points on the assessment for each meeting to consider. The last additional change from this legislative session is that the work group's final report is due December 31st, which gives the work group additional time to finalize decisions before making recommendations to the legislature. And that is the current charge of this work group.
Okay. Now, are there any questions? Particularly those of you who are returning members. I know County Executive Gardner, many of you returning members. Mr. Willis, any questions about the additional charges? Okay. Those are issues that have come up, and we included them for this work group to be the group to give the legislature and the IAC guidance. All right, at this time, we're going to have an update on the progress and the process of the school facilities assessment. We are excited to have you here today. This is something that this work group was formed around the idea of creating this assessment. And so it'll be important for us to hear this. And as Michelle just mentioned, at every meeting of this work group, we will have an update that comes from the process and the progress that is being done on this facilities assessment. So with that, I will yield the floor to our team.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the work group. I'm Alex Donahue with the IAC, and I will begin the presentation on the SFA progress status update. Just a moment, I'll share my screen. I'm not able to, I'd like to show the slides, and I have a little.
You have co-host stability.
Thank you, one moment. Are the slides visible?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. Again, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the work group. The vendor conducting the statewide facilities assessment, Bureau Veritas North America, or BV, are national experts and have performed school facility assessments throughout the country and here in Maryland. They are here with us today to describe how they've conducted the assessment, what they're delivering, and how it's different from what they have typically done elsewhere. Once BV has established the data from the assessment, this work group will be able to determine how it should be used. With me today are Matt Munter, Principal and Executive Vice President, Bill Champion, Project Manager, and Tom Bart, IT Manager. First, they will provide a brief status report on the statewide assessment and then describe how it works. Matt and Bill.
Good morning. Thank you, Alex. I'm Bill Champion. I would like to start off with a status report on the SFA by reviewing the scope and timeline. So we, the BV team, started collecting data from 25 LEAs back in November. We began on-site assessments in December of 2020. We completed assessing 1,404 schools, active and holding facilities by the end of June 2021, last month, right on schedule. As part of our data QC process, we received comments from all of the LEAs. We've addressed 90% of them to date. We expected many questions and comments from the LEAs because of the differences between this and previous assessments. We received comments and we're continuing to respond to them. The RFP requires us to perform a uniform statewide facility assessment that will provide an accurate and repeatable measure of the current physical condition and educational sufficiency of each school facility to support the state required educational programs. The assessments will provide a clear common measure to differentiate the facilities with the highest needs from the lower ones. For physical properties, we observe and record the remaining useful life of every major building system that could impact the delivery of education and generate a facility condition index, or an FCI, for each of them. We've also collected and recorded whether a building system has exceeded its uniform expected life or not, which will also be useful data in determining the best facilities management practices, which are formed over time. For educational sufficiency, the measuring stick used for each facility is the IAC's Educational Sufficiency Standards, which defines a minimum facility set of attributes to support the delivery of state-required educational programs. To look at the facility's capacity, we did not use the current enrollment, but instead we used the projection of future enrollment 5 years into the future, with the year 2019 as a baseline. The baseline set of comparable statewide data will be updated continuously by visiting each school no less than 4 years. Additionally, the facility data can be used by the LEAs for identifying capital maintenance or systemic projects that can keep the learning environments educationally sufficient. This assessment differs from the typical assessment approach often used by the LEAs of estimating the cost to repair facilities that inherently may not be educationally sufficient, even if they're returned to like new condition. It parallels the approach taken by NASA, the US Army Corps of Engineers, and the US Navy to generate comparable data to inform budgeting for facilities investments. We estimate the remaining useful lifespans of each system and describe its condition. Right. The key metric used here is the Facility Condition Index, the FCI. It's the amount of the lifespan depleted. We apply a degradation curve to the RUL figure, or the remaining useful life figure, to arrive at the depletion value. The key point here, the FCI is a relative condition measure. So the lower the FCI, the better the relative condition. We also measure the educational sufficiency of each facility against the IAC's Educational Facility Sufficiency Standards. We log any deficiencies and add the deficiencies to the condition index figures to arrive at a combined facility score that takes into account both condition and educational sufficiency. We use this scientific approach in our process. We utilized a careful and discrete methodology based on industry standards such as typical lifespans from BOMA, and BOMA is Building Owners and Managers Association International, and best practices in facility assessment. We trained all of our assessors on our evaluation methods to ensure consistency and use a standardized process for maximum inter-rater reliability. Our process is transparent as it allows for fair comparisons of data across schools and LEAs and supports a single statewide ranking of needs. We have a flexible data structure to support generating what-if scenarios and studying uses of the data. So overall, our process is as such. The team collects the data from the LEAs. Prior to going out, our engineers, our assessors, our building experts conduct on-site assessments of each of the facilities, and Bureau Veritas with the LEAs engage in a quality control process with LEA feedback and input on all the data points captured. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions?
Ask a question. Oh, ask one.
Yes. Senator McCray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be appropriate if Mr. Champion would just supply the 17 main building systems that establishes and determines the FCI score? I'm new to the group, so I could assume it's the roof, the HVAC, but 17 of them is a lot.
Yeah, all right. If you give me 1 second, I can read them off to you.
Hey, Bill, maybe you just break down HVAC into its pieces, and that might be a good example of how we get to 17. It does sound like, a lot to the unfamiliar.
Great. Well, it's really the primary and secondary systems of each of the facilities. So it includes the roof, the facades, the windows, the doors, the HVAC equipment, the plumbing, the electrical, and just all the components that make up the building. So you'll see the skin of the building, the brick or the surrounding facades of the building as one item, windows, doors, interior finishes, everything that makes up the building components and the equipment and the systems in each of the facilities.
Madam Chair, I'll make sure that the list is provided to the staff for all the committee members to have by the end of the meeting.
Good, thank you. And yes, Miss Molly, you have a question.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So my question is, did COVID-19 have any impact on your assessment while you were doing the assessment? And also, was energy usage information for all these schools part of the assessment? Thank you.
I'll start with the second question first. Energy usage of the school was not included in the sense that we looked at the energy bills and measured that. Now, if there was a system that was the integrity has been compromised, for example, leaky or broken windows or broken seals around windows that were allowing for poor energy conservation or just not holding the energy integrity of the building, those items were included as part of the building system analysis for each of the schools. In terms of the second question and COVID did not impact the assessment per se. As an engineer and person going through the schools, we had better access to the schools. So we were able to get through them more easily, take more time, see all the classrooms without students in them.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
County Executive.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to know if there's an estimate on when we will see the outcome of the assessment itself.
Alex, I'll leave that one
Yes.
to you.
Yes. Ms. Gardner, the initial FCI data will be provided to the work group at the meeting on the 28th. And you'll be able to take an initial look at what the numbers are for each school and certainly for each LEA as well.
Very good. Very good. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. We look forward. I think it's, when we get that list in front of us, hopefully that gives us a better understanding. Let me, you had a chart there that showed that you look at the physical needs and the physical structure of a building, and then you combine it with the educational structure. So what I was thinking about when you were describing that is, do you look at computer labs, science labs, robotics labs, so on and so forth, and look at those and actually do any assessment of the equipment within those labs?
That's a good question. We don't assess the equipment in those labs. Part of our assessment does include an accounting of the rooms in the school, so whether those labs do exist. We've been very careful to make sure that we're looking at state required programs, and when we have those, we are measuring the size of those spaces and then applying sufficiency standards to the actual need and the attributes of those spaces.
I think that's an important. I'm not being critical at all. Don't misunderstand me, but I do think when those of us who've been fortunate enough to travel around the state, and visit many schools. One of the things that has jumped out at me is the incredible differences in quality of labs and lab facilities for students, which I do think leads to learning gaps in many places. And I don't know, was it, Molly, were you clapping for me or do you have another question?
I was doing both, Madam Chair,
Oh,
clapping.
thank you.
And I had a follow-up question, if I may.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So real quick, when you were doing the facilities assessment, did you use condition of the drinking water in the school buildings as well, brown water or water with lead in them? Was that used as part of the assessment to decide your condition?
Great question. So we did not measure lead and water, but we did ask the LEAs if those were issues. And they had the opportunity to self-report on those issues.
Good, very good. Because this has come up, Senator McRae, as a matter of fact, I think, has had legislation in, along with a colleague on the House side, that dealt with the condition of plumbing and so on and so forth. So that's now a part of our Healthy Schools initiative. So it's a very good point. Very good. Any other questions? Okay. I think then we're going to move to talking a little bit about the schedule. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. The draft schedule is on the last page of the handout that you were given. We've already heard from the Treasurer's Office that most of these dates conflict with the BPW meetings, so we need to go back and create a new draft schedule. If you have any that we will get out this week, because I know it's important to get these on your calendar. If you have any hard conflicts, if you could email those to me so that we can take those into account when making the draft schedule, I would appreciate that between now and I guess about October, and then we have to rethink what November and December looks like for the work group. The plan right now for the work group is to meet at least once a month for about 2 hours to go through all these decision points about the same time each meeting. So to keep some consistency.
Yeah, we'd like to have a consistent day and time so that everybody can mark their calendar. And we picked one that conflicted with, Treasurer Kopp. I think it's very important to have her voice on this committee. So we'll figure that out and get back to you. Probably keeping it on Wednesday, but moving the time so that she can be a part of this work group. Is there any other questions, issues that need to be raised before we adjourn? And the staff will get you, Michelle, Rachel will get you a new proposed meeting time and date so that you can mark your calendars appropriately. And get to them. Yeah, get to them any conflicts you see. Yes.
I was just gonna suggest that if the dates work for everyone that were provided, but the meeting was moved to say 2 to 4 in the afternoon, if you all could let us know if that is a problem, because that's the easiest thing to do.
Okay. We got that. Give Michelle and Rachel input on that. Very good. Well, I'm glad to see everyone. We got a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm very happy to have this work group together and beginning to do the work we need to get done by the end of the year, certainly the end of this term. And I thank you very much. So see you next time. And thank you for attending today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ed, congratulations again.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.